Imagine a fiberglass rod planted in an open field without propellers, without a gearbox, without bearings, without a rotating shaft, without that noisy turbine you'd expect to see when someone talks about wind energy. Just a thin, vertical rod, almost silent. It sways slowly in a light breeze and yet produces electricity. A few meters away, a small conventional wind turbine remains stationary. The wind exists, but it's not strong enough to overcome the inertia of the wind. The rotor doesn't spin, the generator doesn't work, nothing happens, but the rod continues to move. A small, rhythmic, almost discrete movement. At the base, magnets move in front of a copper coil, and with each oscillation, a small electric current appears. In a simple prototype, some of the materials can cost much less than a commercial turbine. We're not talking about replacing a power plant, nor about powering an entire house, but about a technical idea strange enough to raise an uncomfortable question. If a structure without propellers can transform weak wind into electricity, why does almost no one talk about it? Why is it that when we think of wind energy, we still only imagine large blades spinning on the horizon? The answer doesn't begin in a factory, nor in a startup. It begins almost 80 years earlier on a bridge. In November 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington state collapsed. It wasn't old. It had only been inaugurated 4 months prior. Engineers had calculated the load, the steel, the concrete, the cables, and the structural limits known at the time. But there was a force that wasn't yet fully understood: the wind. Not just the wind, but lateral pressure. The bridge could withstand wind pressure. The problem was more subtle. When air passed over the bridge's long, narrow deck, it didn't flow cleanly down the structure. The flow separated, creating alternating eddies, first on one side, then the other. And these eddies pushed and pulled the structure in repeated rhythms. The bridge began to oscillate, then it began to twist. In the case of Tacoma, the collapse involved a complex combination of aeroelastic instability, vortex-induced vibration, and torsion. It wasn't wind magic, nor was it simply a bridge swaying too much. It was a flexible structure interacting with the air in a way that engineers were still learning to understand. When the vertical oscillation turned into torsion, the bridge itself began to fuel the movement. The structure absorbed the wind's energy, deformed the flow around it, and reinforced the next twist. The movement ceased to be merely pushed by the wind. It began to be sustained by a kind of feedback loop. This phenomenon helped change bridge engineering forever. After Tacoma, tall chimneys, towers, submarine cables, deepwater oil risers, and structures exposed to wind began to be studied with much more care. Because when a pipe, a tower, or a cable begins to vibrate for long enough, the metal can suffer fatigue. And fatigue doesn't have to break everything at once. It works silently, cycle after cycle, until failure. For decades, the mission was clear: to prevent vibration, reduce movement, dampen oscillation, make the structure withstand the wind. Physics was studied, modeled, tested, and documented, but almost always with the same objective: to stop movement. Few people ask the opposite question: what if, instead of combating this vibration, someone built a machine designed to vibrate? This turning point came with a Spanish engineering team interested in small-scale urban wind energy. Their problem wasn't preventing a bridge from collapsing. It was something else, much more commonplace. Small conventional wind turbines work poorly in many cities. They are noisy. The rotor spinning near buildings creates risk, discomfort, and difficulty in obtaining approval. Installation requires support, clear space, permits, and maintenance. And urban wind is rarely clean. It hits walls, deflects off roofs, accelerates in corridors between buildings, and returns full of turbulence. A small turbine may promise nominal power with winds at 6 ms, but at 3 ms, many produce little, sometimes not even truly entering the useful range. That's when the team behind the vortex bladeless idea looked at the phenomenon that engineering had spent decades trying to control and changed the question: what if the structure didn't resist the wind? What if it tuned into it? Instead of a rotor, imagine a conical fiberglass mast designed to oscillate in low winds. At the base, magnets and coils draw energy from this swaying. In some prototypes, the oscillation can start at around 2 to 3 ms, depending on the geometry, mass, mast stiffness, and wind regime. This detail is important. There's no magic, there's tuning, there's engineering, and there's a well-known physics behind it. When wind passes over a blunt body, like a cylinder, a rod, or a mast, it doesn't follow the surface perfectly smoothly. The flow separates on both sides. Behind the object, alternating vortices appear. One side, then the other, then the first side. Again, this pattern is called a Kármán vortex wake. It's not a curiosity of laboratory. It's the same logic that makes a flag flutter. It's what can make a string sing in the wind. It's what makes reeds vibrate in a river. Each vortex is created for an instant, a region of low pressure next to the mast. The mast is pulled in that direction. Soon after, Another vortex detaches from the opposite side. The mast is pushed back. The wind repeats this cycle. Left, right, left, right. The frequency of this movement depends mainly on the wind speed and the diameter of the mast, but the secret is not just in swaying. It's in swaying at the right rhythm. Every physical object has a natural frequency. It's the rhythm at which it tends to vibrate when disturbed. When the frequency of the vortices approaches the natural frequency of the mast, the so-called locking or resonance coupling occurs. At this point, the oscillation ceases to be a weak tremor. As it grows, the mast begins to be driven by the wind itself, not by an isolated gust, but by an organized sequence of alternating forces. Therefore, the shape of the mast is not decorative. It needs to be carefully designed. A perfectly uniform cylinder tends to resonate in a narrow band of wind because the frequency of the vortices depends on the diameter. As the mast tapers from base to tip, different sections interact with the wind at different frequencies. The useful range widens. The device doesn't need a single perfect condition to start working. The electrical part comes in at the base. Permanent magnets attached to the oscillating mast move back and forth in front of a fixed copper coil. This is linear electromagnetic induction. The same general principle as a common generator, but without rotation. In a conventional turbine, the wind rotates blades. The blades rotate a shaft. The shaft drives a generator. Here, the movement is alternating, back and forth, back and forth. And this displacement of the magnets in front of the coil generates alternating electric current without a gearbox, without bearings, without a rotating shaft, without lubrication, without the moving parts that normally require maintenance in a small turbine. But this doesn't mean the system is simple to make work well. The most delicate point is the control. An electronic circuit can adjust the electromagnetic load as the wind changes. This adjustment helps the mast stay closer to resonance for longer. Without this control, the mast can still oscillate. It can still generate current, but it loses efficiency. With it, the system better follows the changes in the wind. And this is where the comparison needs to be honest. At maximum power, a device based on vortex-induced vibration does not outperform a well-designed conventional turbine of the same scale when the wind is strong, clean, and constant. An efficient propeller still extracts more energy under these conditions, but this is not the most common scenario on rooftops, in backyards, partially protected urban areas, or small installations near houses. In these places, the wind changes direction, loses speed, hits obstacles, passes through trees, descends from roofs, and returns turbulent. A small turbine may have a nice peak in the catalog, but remains stationary most of the time. Therefore, the number that really matters is not just the promised maximum power, but the actual energy that reaches the battery over a week. A system of this type can power LED lighting, sensors, small communication modules, monitoring equipment, or slow charging a battery. It's not a replacement for the electrical grid. It doesn't power an entire house. It's not a miracle, but it can be silent, discreet, and useful in specific situations, without noise disturbances, without rotational vibration on the roof, without the risk of collision with birds from spinning propellers, without that circular movement that attracts the attention of neighbors, inspectors, or building managers. The mast simply sways like a reed on a riverbank. And in this simple movement, mechanical work becomes electricity. So we arrive at the inevitable question. If this works, why don't we see this type of mast on every roof? The first answer lies in real limitations. A device based on vortex-induced vibration needs adequate wind exposure. An enclosed patio can kill performance. A wall blocking the flow can reduce almost everything. A deep urban corridor can transform the wind into too much turbulence and too little useful energy. Tuning also matters. A mast adjusted for an average wind range may perform poorly elsewhere. Geometry changes the result. Mass changes the result. Base rigidity changes the result. The installation changes the result. To generate significant energy, a single small unit is rarely enough. Several rods would be needed with correct spacing, cabling, controller, battery, electrical protection, and structural calculations. And the control circuit, although simple compared to a mechanical turbine, remains a sensitive point. If it fails, the system may continue to oscillate, but it moves away from the ideal point. These limitations are honest and need to be stated, but they don't explain everything. Because a small conventional wind turbine already has a market category. It has a stand, bearings, casing, tower, cables, spare parts, inspection, certified assembly, installation manual, maintenance cycle. The manufacturer knows how to sell, the technician knows how to repair, the insurer knows how to classify, the inspector knows how to classify, the installer knows what to offer. A fiberglass rod with a magnet at the base doesn't easily fit into this logic. There's no oil to change, no gears to overhaul, no blades to repaint, no main bearing to replace. There isn't, at least not yet, a mature market for parts, service, certification, and mass installation. Despite large-scale production, the unit cost remains high. Without clear regulations, construction companies hesitate. Without long-term public data, consumers are suspicious. Without a simple regulatory framework, the technology remains stuck in a strange zone, too promising to ignore, but too different to be adopted quickly. There's no need to imagine a conspiracy. Just look at the incentive structure. Companies install what they know, insurers approve what they recognize, construction companies avoid what could cause problems. And the market tends to reward technologies that fit into known sales, maintenance, and replacement cycles. Even so, the principle can be recovered. Fiberglass, neodymium magnets, copper coils, rectifiers, and charge controllers are known components. The difficult part is not imagining the system, but making it work well, safely, in a real place. Geometry determines a lot. The relationship between height and diameter needs to allow oscillation without bending the mast too much. The base needs to be rigid. If the support flexes, some of the energy is lost in the structure itself. Resonance is impaired and production drops. A mast of uniform diameter is essential. It works within a narrower wind range. A conical wind turbine widens this window. The coil is another critical point. If the wire is too thin, the resistance increases and the output drops. If the electrical load is not properly adjusted, the generator itself hinders the movement it should be harnessing. Therefore, the most sensible application is not to sell a miracle, but to combine sources. During the day, a small solar panel can charge the battery. At night, or on cloudy and windy days, the wind turbine can supplement the system with silent energy. One source covers part of what the other loses. The sun helps when the air is still, the wind helps when light is unavailable, and that's exactly where this idea gets interesting. Not as an absolute substitute for solar energy, not as an enemy of conventional turbines, but as a discrete niche alternative with low mechanical maintenance, capable of harnessing a type of movement that engineering has spent decades trying to eliminate. The physics behind it was known long before anyone tried to harvest energy from it. The data existed, the models existed, the engineers understood the phenomenon. The barrier was never just a lack of what was also lacking in common knowledge, was the absence of a clear commercial category for a device without peace of mind, without gears, and with few parts to replace after installation. This pattern appears many times in the history of technology. Ideas that work under certain conditions, ideas that have been tested, ideas that have been understood, but remained on the sidelines, not because they violated physics, but because they did not easily fit into existing profit, standardization, and maintenance structures. When these technologies fall out of common knowledge, people inherit the most expensive alternative, as if it were the only option, but it is not always. Sometimes the solution did not disappear because it was useless.